Good evening. I have some news which may delight you. Murder is not dead, and I'm not talking about those murders splashed all over the front pages. Those are in such bad taste. I refer to those exquisite murders with a touch of the bizarre, and which take fiendish ingenuity to solve. One such picture will be presented with for your shivering delight immediately. Good evening, everyone. This is Stone Gasman live from New York City. And tonight we are going to be doing an audio commentary, a 50th anniversary audio commentary for Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy. This is one of those Hitchcock films that I don't think gets enough discussion or love or credit. And, of course, we all know what the director's masterpieces are, Rear Window, Vertigo, Psycho, those type of films. This is considered the director's last true masterpiece, where he returned to England, his home country of England, to film it in 1971. It was written by Anthony Shaffer, based on a book. Anthony Shaffer was, of course, very popular at the time for his play Sleuth, which had played on Broadway and in London throughout 1970. Hitchcock saw the movie and said, I got to work with this guy. I mean, I love his structure. I love how he builds everything and everything. So, he and Anthony Shaffer hooked up to do Frenzy. So I'm very excited to do this 50th anniversary audio commentary with all of you. And just to let you know, if you want to see Frenzy for free while listening, there is the link where you can watch it for free on YouTube. I actually, when I did a search, I noticed on YouTube there was also an Italian dub of the movie. But at the same time, I managed to find an English dub. So there it is right there. So you don't have to bother, wasting money through Amazon Prime or just, bring up a separate window and we can go ahead and watch Frenzy together. And before I press play on Frenzy, I wanted to mention that I have a very long history with Hitchcock. I mean, I grew up practically with Hitchcock's films. The one I saw multiple times, countless times growing up, was actually his 1935 masterpiece, The 39 Steps, which of course became an international success. It brought the attention of Hollywood and everything. And I love that film. Robert Donat, Madeleine Carroll. I mean, one of the quintessential wrong man thrillers that he made all throughout his career. And I really love 39 Steps. And I don't think that gets enough love among his masterpieces of the 1950s. But, I had watched Suspicion, Notorious, The Trouble with Harry. Regrettably, I saw the 56 version of The Man Who Knew Too Much More than the 34 version with Peter Lorre. And of course, Vertigo is one of my all-time favorites. But you know what? I have to say off the bat that my absolute favorite Hitchcock film is North by Northwest, which for 137 minutes just keeps your attention with this, this James Bond type thriller where Cary Grant has to, go cross country and figure out who set him up and everything, and find out, this man named George Kaplan and everything. And forgive me, I need to reboot my Blu-ray player here. But that was the film that I think after seeing, a number of times and everything, I think that film is probably, in my opinion, Hitchcock's best work, period. I know a lot of people would go with Psycho and a lot of people would go with Vertigo. But yeah, I think North by Northwest is my absolute favorite. But I'm going to go ahead and press play in about 4 seconds here. Forgive me, what's very annoying about these Universal discs is that if you leave the menu on for a certain amount of time, that it just decides to But tell you what, I'm going to press play on the Blu-ray player right now. So all of you should be opening up here on London. And this is actually a helicopter shot that is going from on the Thames River. So just 1 second. So I will count down from 3, 2, 1, and we will press play. Okay, I got the R-rated logo. Just some of these Universal Blu-rays really get on my nerves, but okay. All right, and 3, 2, 1, and play. And what we are seeing is the Universal logo on this Blu-ray. This is, of course, the modern-day Universal logo. Because actually this is the 100th anniversary disc. Yeah, back in 2013, Universal had re-released all of Hitchcock's films in celebration of the 100th anniversary, and they put all of them out on Blu-ray. Although Frenzy has not been given the 4K treatment yet, which is kind of disappointing. But here we are opening up on London, and right there in the upper right corner it says the City of London. Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy. Now, the music that we hear right here is not Bernard Herrmann, very sadly. By this time, Bernard Herrmann and Alfred Hitchcock had a falling out. And what's interesting is that the original composer who was hired to do Frenzy was actually Henry Mancini, of course, famous for his collaborations with Blake Edwards on the Pink Panther films and everything. What happened was that Hitchcock gave him very few notes on what exactly to do. And when Hitch heard the score, he reportedly said it was just too heavy. It was just much too much for what he was shooting for. And thus, the Henry Mancini score was rejected. And what we have here is music by a composer named Ron Goodwin. I actually really like this score a lot, and I love how it opens up the movie. But he was an English composer, and he had scored over 70 films, mostly British films. I mean, he had done the Miss Marple films, screenplay by Anthony Schaefer, who we'll talk about later. And, of course, there is the credit for directed by Alfred Hitchcock. As we go under the bridge here, this is a wonderful, wonderful helicopter shot. But just real quick, going back to Ron Goodwin, he was born in England. He learned to play the piano and trumpet from the age of 5, which allowed him to join the school band. And then when he was working as a copyist, he formed his own orchestra in his spare time and began arranging and conducting recordings for over 50 artists, which resulted in more than 100 chart successes. He wrote his first feature film score for Whirlpool. After Bachman became executive producer at MGM British Studios in 1959, Goodwin composed and conducted the music for most of its productions, as well as working for other film studios. Among his long list of credits, we have The Trials of Oscar Wilde, Village of the Damned, the very famous British horror movie about the kids with the eyes and everything. Great, great stuff. And he also did Of Human Bondage and The Alphabet Murders, Those Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines, Candleshoe for Disney, and Gawain and the Green Knight, Force 10 from Navarone. And his very last film was for the 1986 animated movie Valhalla, which was a Danish movie. But this film is basically Alfred Hitchcock's return to London after a long hiatus in Hollywood. After The Lady Vanishes in 1938, Hitchcock went to Hollywood to make Rebecca for producer David O. Selznick, which of course won Best Picture. Now, right there in the center of the screen, in the hat and the suit, the beautiful suit and tie, is of course the master himself, Alfred Hitchcock. And that is not the only shot of him, actually. There's another shot of him, which I'm going to point out here in just a few seconds. But first, we are treated to a naked woman in the River Thames with a necktie around her neck. And this was kind of inspired by Jack the Ripper. What if a modern-day serial killer was terrorizing London by performing these series of necktie murders? And here we open up on an image which had never been seen before in an Alfred Hitchcock movie, which is a nude woman floating in the River Thames, which must have been a bit shocking for film goers in 1972. And there is Hitch right there in the hat, right below the man with the beard, as he's just like listening and watching on and everything. So he has more than just a little cameo. And, Hitchcock, of course, famously appeared. Well, I got to say real quick, this is a brilliant mise-en-scene where we open up with John Finch putting on a necktie right after we notice that murder. And we'll talk about John Finch a bit later. But Alfred Hitchcock, of course, appeared in all his films. He appears somewhere in every single one of his films. Even his 1944 film Lifeboat, where it just has a bunch of survivors on a boat in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the nowhere. I remember my father had actually tested me before we saw Lifeboat and said, yeah, it's just, all it is just a small group of people who are stuck in a boat in the middle of the ocean. Where is Hitchcock's cameo? And at first I was like, well, I don't know. Does he appear as like in a whale suit or something? No, I'm not going to give it away. I'm not going to give away where Hitchcock is in that movie Lifeboat. You just have to check it out for yourself. But I got to admit, when I saw it, I couldn't help but just laugh my ass off. I mean, Hitchcock had a very, famous sense of humor that he applied in every project that he worked on. Every single project that he worked on, there's this dribbling of black comedy, which makes everything so, so much more digestible, because he deals with murders and blood and everything. And it's just wonderful. But Frenzy is considered Hitchcock's last masterpiece. It wasn't his last film. That would have been the 1976 film Family Plot. Which, believe it or not, is one of the few Hitchcock movies I've never seen before. But rest assured, in 4 years' time, I'll probably be doing a 50th anniversary commentary for that film. So I'll just wait and discover it then. As for Frenzy, the interesting thing is with Frenzy, the movies that I grew up the most with in terms of Hitchcock growing up was, of course, Vertigo and Psycho. And on those original prints, which after 1983, after we finally got permission from Hitchcock's estate to put him back out in theaters and put him out on VHS and everything, thanks to Universal's persistence, there was a trailer that had been made for Frenzy, which they stuck on a lot of those prints, which has it actually has Hitchcock floating in the Thames River. And he just lifts his head up and is like, I suppose you are wondering why I am floating around London like this. And of course, it was a 1972 trailer for Frenzy. Now, but this film here again, Hitchcock was returning to basically where he grew up. It was a homecoming for him, essentially. A lot of this film was shot in Covent Garden with all the, everybody selling everything from fish to fruit to vegetables and everything. Hitchcock's father actually was one of those selling all those fruits and vegetables and everything you can imagine here in Covent Garden. And here we have the two stars of the film. On the right, of course, is John Finch, and now he's walked over to the left. But yeah, on the left now is John Finch, who right before this movie, right before Hitchcock met with him, he had literally only a few weeks ago had finished playing Macbeth for Roman Polanski. But it had not been released yet, so Hitchcock had not seen it by that time. So as a matter of fact, he asked somebody to show him something that John Finch had done. Well, John Finch didn't do much. I mean, he hadn't done much by this time. In 1970, he was in the Vampire Lovers, as well as the Horror of Frankenstein, Hammer horror film. And then he had done John Schleisinger's Sunday Bloody Sunday, in which he appeared as a Scotsman. And then he was, of course, in Roman Polanski's Macbeth. And then he was given the role of Frenzy after he had read the script. And Hitchcock said, basically, would you like the part? John Finch said yes, and they went out to lunch. And it's funny because I had been reading this book, which came out a decade ago, about the making of Frenzy, and it's not a very thick book. But in it, I discovered that this was not one of Hitchcock's favorite leading men. I mean, their relationship was professional for the most part. And Hitchcock, let John Finch know that, hey, if you want to make changes to the script, or if you have suggestions that you would like to make change, go ahead and submit them to my assistant, Peggy Robertson. And he did. But it got to the point where Hitchcock basically had to tell him, look, I said you can make a few changes, not alter the entire script. So, and then there was even this, for like a week or so, Hitchcock was wondering if he had made a mistake, and that there was speculation that he was going to have John Finch fired. But I really like him in this movie, despite the fact he's not one of the more likable Hitchcock protagonists, I guess you could say. But we can talk more about John Finch later. But we also have to mention here on the right is, of course, Barry Foster. And Barry Foster had done a lot of stage work before he was chosen by Hitch to play the villain in this movie. Yes, I mean, despite the fact, I mean, he's basically revealed to be the killer about maybe 40, 50 minutes in. And honestly, when I first saw this film, I didn't think he was the killer. I mean, he gave no indication that he was a murderer or whatever. I mean, in fact, he even seems genuinely concerned for John Finch's character after he got fired at the pub that he was working at and everything. He gives him grapes, he offers him money. He seems genuinely concerned. But Barry Foster, and many of these actors are unfortunately no longer with us. I mean, Barry Foster passed in 2002. John Finch passed in 2012. But Barry Foster had done other films such as Inspector Clouseau in 1968. But it was that same year in which Hitchcock saw a movie called Twisted Nerve, which was directed by Roy Bolting, for the British Lion Film Corporation. It had Haley Mills as well as Billie Whitelaw, who appears later in Frenzy as this woman who doesn't want John Finch to stay at her apartment. Now, I really love this scene because these two actors right here, they're talking about the necktie murders and everything. And John Finch is basically just sitting behind them, not really listening. He's, they're talking about, oh, this is a criminal psychopath and everything. And, they're talking about the psychology of this guy and how he thinks. And he rapes him first, doesn't he? Yes, I believe he does. Yeah, I mean, little fragrant in their discussion of rape here. I think even in 1972, people were like, what? That very cheeky British sensibility and everything. And you see, there's two girls that go in, and then John Finch goes to get another round here. Yeah, I mean, he's basically just there. He's not even an observer. I mean, the audience is hearing all these things about this killer. And John Finch is just, he's just a normal guy. I mean, he just got, sacked from the pub that he was worked at. And, he doesn't, he probably knows about the necktie murder, but it's not like he thinks about it or talks about it with anybody. I mean, these guys, of course, are doing that, but but at any rate, we'll go back to Barry Foster a bit later here. They're so good for the tourist trade. Yeah, foreigners somehow expect the squares of London to be fog-rich, full of handsome cabs and littered with ripped whores, don't you think? Now, here again, Hitchcock did not write this script. This was actually based on a book called Goodbye Piccadilly, Farewell Leicester Square by Arthur LeBurn. Now, like many of Hitchcock's films, though, is that a lot of times they would go away from the source material, and Hitchcock would give the films his own special touch, usually relying on the writer for the structure. And Hitchcock was known to have very healthy relationships with a lot of the writers that he worked with. I mean, I especially love Joseph Stefano when he talks about collaborating with Hitchcock over Psycho, and how that he accepted many of his ideas, even if they didn't seem Hitchcockian, I guess you could say. I mean, like one suggestion which Hitchcock ultimately declined was for the final scene with the psychologist. He actually wanted to use his own psychologist, and Hitchcock was like, no, we need an actor, Joseph. We need an actor. Come on. And so here's John Finch's character now going. His name is Richard Blaney. I think a rather appropriate name for the wrong man in this case. And here he's a little drunk. He's got his cigarettes with him and everything, and he's going to go see his ex-wife, Barbara Jane. Brenda Margaret Blaney, who runs this marriage agency. Oh, now a woman there with the thing on her head, whatever you like to call it. I guess you could. She was in A Clockwork Orange. Actually, she was actually the woman who was with all the government officials when they were forcing Alex to watch all this imagery on the screen. All the Nazi imagery and everything, and she was one of those ones that was trying to cure Alex of his illness, and there's actually a very long scene where she's talking to him in the room that he's staying in and everything. She's really good here, though. I think this actress, her name is no, it's not that. Madge Ryan. That's what it is. Yeah, her name is Madge Ryan, and she was actually an Australian actress. And she's, of course, best known for A Clockwork Orange, but she was also in Summer Holiday in 1963, Endless Night 1972, Who is Killing the Great Chefs of Europe, which is a terrific title. I've never seen that movie before, but it's and in fact, one of her last films was actually in the comedy Splitting Heirs in 1993 with Robbie Coltrane and Rick Moranis. And Catherine Zeta-Jones actually had an early role here. But, okay, now the secretary here that John Finch is talking to now, you probably don't recognize her, but she is, in fact, one of the most famous of all British actresses. Her name is Jean Marsh, and she was very, very popular at the time in the early 1970s for this UK series called Upstairs Downstairs, where she actually won a BAFTA award. And here she's made to look rather dowdy and everything. But most of you will probably recognize Jean Marsh when she later appeared as both Princess Mombi in Return to Oz, as well as Queen Bavmorda in Willow, directed by Ron Howard and executive produced by George Lucas, which is actually going to get a rebooted, a sequel series later in the year, courtesy of Disney Plus. I actually saw the trailer for that. It looks really cool. And here we have Anna Massey in the role of John Finch's ex-wife, Barbara Jane. I keep screwing that up. I'm so sorry. No, this is Barbara Lee Hunt. Yes, this is Barbara Lee Hunt as his ex-wife. And she is still with us. Now, she is one of the few actors in this movie who is actually still with us today. And she had done Broadway productions of Hamlet, and she was in Sherlock Holmes in 1974, won the 1993 Olivier Award for Best Supporting Actress for the National Theater production of An Inspector Calls. And Frenzy was her very first movie. It was her very first movie. I mean, after this, she made only a few movies after this, like Oh Heavenly Dog with Chevy Chase, which was a Benji movie. And her last film, as a matter of fact, was the adaptation of Vanity Fair with Reese Witherspoon, based on the book by William Makepeace Thackeray. And of course, we just saw Jean Marsh there again, who plays the secretary. Very unrecognizable. I mean, I've seen Willow in Return to Oz countless times, and I honestly just did not recognize her. Even when, I mean, I saw this film once in high school. A lot of the movies I grew up watching, you know, I had rented from the library, and this was no exception. Based on the trailer that I saw in all those Vertigo and Rear Window and Psycho prints. And you know, here we get a lot of character development as far as John Finch's character. I mean, he's not the most likable protagonist. I will admit that. However, I cannot help but feel for the guy. He is the wrong man, and I mean, here again, Hitchcock. I think that he you know, chose him based on the fact that he could deliver. I mean, what I noticed in the documentary, which is on the Blu-ray, there's a 45-minute documentary that Laurent Bouzereau did in 2000 when he was doing extras for the Blu-ray. In fact, it's right on there, The Story of Frenzy. No commentary on the Blu-ray, by the way. But he was saying that he met with John Finch and several of the other actors who were still alive in 2000 when the documentary was being shot. And they had nothing but praise for Hitchcock as a master storyteller, as a director, as somebody on set who would also always listen and always would take suggestions and everything. You know, and I think they felt very, very lucky and fortunate to have worked with the master. Now, it should be also noted that the role of Brenda here, which is of course played by Barbara Lee Hunt, originally Hitchcock wanted Vanessa Redgrave. Yes, the great Vanessa Redgrave, who was in the movie Blow Up, Antione's Blow Up, and still with us at 85, by the way. And she had turned the movie down. She turned the role down. Yeah, she turned down this role. And Helen Mirren, who later played Alma Reveal in Hitchcock, the movie with Anthony Hopkins, met with the man himself to play the role of Babs Milligan, who is John Finch's girlfriend, who we saw earlier in the pub. That is Barbara Jane Babs Milligan, and she's known all throughout the movie as just Babs. But she rejected the role and later said that she absolutely regretted doing so. But probably the most shocking turn down was that of Michael Caine. Originally, Hitchcock went to Michael Caine to play Richard Blaney. And reportedly, Caine said that he thought the character was absolutely disgusting. Sorry, I keep screwing up. Sorry, scratch that. Michael Caine was offered the role of Rusk. Robert Rusk, played by Barry Foster, who of course gave John Finch the grapes earlier. You know, you think you prepare all week for this thing, but man, I hate making these mistakes during the commentary like that. I do greatly apologize. I mean, you have to think of so many names and so many roles and everything. So, but yeah, Michael Caine was originally offered the role of Rusk, the killer, and he thought that the character was disgusting and said he did not want to be associated with the part at all. And it's funny because Michael Caine also starred with Laurence Olivier in the same year's Sleuth, which of course was based on Anthony Schaeffer's play. So I'm gonna be quoting this book several times throughout the rest of the commentary. This is a really gorgeous book, by the way, by Raymond Fiore. And in chapter 4, he talks about the working relationship between Hitchcock and Anthony Shaffer. Quote, joining the legion of Hitchcock collaborators would now be Anthony Shaffer. He was somewhat of a prodigy. His first major play, Sleuth, ran for a remarkable 8 years in London and another 4 on Broadway, having opened in London in January of 1970 and then in November of the same year in New York. Indeed, it was an enormous hit in both venues. Hitchcock had seen the play, and he recognized its wit and its sharply defined structure. Hitchcock knew the world of the theater, of course, and in general, he appreciated the craftsmanship of a solid playwright. He once commented to Truffaut that, quote, a playwright will tend to make a better screenwriter than a novelist because he is used to the building of successive climaxes. In any event, Shaffer accepted Hitchcock's telephoned New Year's Eve overtures to the extent that he at least agreed in principle to collaborate with the director at his studio offices in California. Firstly, though, the two of them met briefly over 4 days in London to discuss the novel and to scout locations. They were joined by Mrs. Hitchcock. The two partners to be gathered again in California in late January. A studio car delivered Mr. Shaffer to the Hitchcock offices at Universal at 10:30 on the morning of January 22nd, 1971. Interestingly, the collaboration seemed at first less than promising. Unlike the young John Michael Hayes, the 44-year-old Anthony Shaffer felt no compulsion to flatter Hitchcock with a fawning analysis of a favorite work. In fact, Shaffer began their association by doing just the opposite. He offered to point out the weak moments in some of Hitchcock's most celebrated films. Oh, man. Can you imagine? I mean, I'm sure that a lot of writers at the time would have, given their right arm to work with Hitchcock and said, oh, this is my favorite film of yours. I love this. I love this. And I love that. Anthony Shaffer got into criticism mode, actually. He offered to point out the weak moments in some of Hitchcock's most celebrated films. Quote, there are huge holes in a number of your films that logically make no sense, he claims, citing a sequence in North by Northwest. As an example, after watching North by Northwest together and then lunching in what Shaffer described as a, quote, wintry silence, Hitchcock then commenced to offer his defense of the plot twist in the film, after which Shaffer recalls the two said about working on Frenzy. Apparently, Shaffer had earned the grudging respect of the aging master, and their collaboration then proceeded with remarkable efficiency. They met each morning at Hitchcock's bungalow on the Universal lot. Labeling the space a bungalow is not unlike the American captains of industry calling their mansions in Newport, Rhode Island, cottages. Hitchcock's suite was the largest at Universal and included, quote, offices for his design staff and writer, adjoining rooms with editing equipment, a separate office for his assistant Peggy Robertson, a kitchen, a cocktail lounge, and bathroom attached to his spacious private office, a dining room, and a projection room seating 8. By the time Shaffer arrived for their first meeting, Hitchcock had been occupying the space for over 8 years, and his routine was by then well established. He liked to keep regular hours. He would arrive sometime between 9 and 10:30 each morning, break for lunch shortly after noon, and leave for his home in Bel Air no later than 5 p.m. His interaction with his scenario writers had by now almost become well entrenched. Many of Shaffer's predecessors recalled their experiences with Hitchcock either in their memoirs or through interviews with one of the biographers. There's a pattern that emerges from a synthesis of all these recollections. For when Hitchcock described the most enjoyable part of making a film as being those sessions with the writers, they discussed storylines and plot details, he was revealing a part of himself that he was to become only too familiar to his collaborators. Hitchcock was a great raconteur, and he loved to regale his guests with tales of his career, telling and retelling stories that made their way into all the biographies. Most of the stories seem to have been told after lunch. The meetings were generally reserved for the serious work of creating the treatment that would lead eventually to a finished script. Shaffer claims in his memoirs that he indulged Hitchcock in his storytelling role, and it seems clear from all sources that the collaboration proceeded quite smoothly. Donald Spoto calls it, quote, the smoothest since Psycho. So smooth, in fact, that neither participant chose to comment much about it. The only anecdote to appear in Schaeffer's memoirs, for example, is the delightful one about lunch. As a man of regular habits, Hitchcock tended to stop work each day at the same time and have a lunch brought to his office complex. And each day, the lunch was the same, steak and salad. After quite a few of these, Schaeffer gently suggested that they might have something different once in a while. The next day, Schaeffer recalled, quote, a 15-course dinner arrived, catered by Chasins, and was laid at my table side. Hitch, of course, had his small steak and salad. Schaeffer summarizes his experiences on the Frenzy script as a positive one. Hitchcock was, quote, extremely kind and considerate to me, he relates in his memoirs. He even called me up on one occasion to ask if he could change a single word in the script. As for Hitchcock, he later proclaimed that he had a, quote, a happy time with the writer. Indeed, they must have. Hitchcock soon took to ending their sessions at 4 p.m. rather than 5 to offer a pitcher of daiquiris for the two to share. That's wonderful. But what is not so wonderful is the sequence right here, which is, by 1972, not many audiences had seen a rape on screen before. So this is pretty rough stuff for early 1970s audiences. I mean, the MPA had only been established only a few years before. And this got an R rating, by the way. In fact, this is the only film in Hitchcock's entire resume to have an R rating. Yes, I know Psycho was given an R in 1984, but I think that's ridiculous. And why it still has an R rating to this day is kind of a mystery to me, because Psycho has PG-13 written all over it, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, of course, it was made when the production code was dying and everything. But, and of course, you can make an argument that Psycho, like Frenzy, has nudity in it. The shower scene, people have often debated if there is actually nudity in the shower scene, but I don't think there is. I think that Hitchcock actually was able to use the camera enough to where we, as Janet Leigh said on the documentary, we think we see, but we don't actually see. A lot of it is actually rather fuzzied and everything. But this was very, very strong stuff for just not 1972 audiences, but also Hitchcock fans in general. And this is actually one of the most complex sequences in the film. It took about 3 to 4 days to shoot, as a matter of fact. And I was going to mention that, of course, one of the first films to deal with the subject of rape was, of course, the 1948 film Johnny Belinda, which had won Jane Wyman the Academy Award for Best Actress. 2 years after that, Ida Lupino directed a film in 1950 called Outrage, which is actually a movie about a woman getting raped. Mm-hmm. Ida Lupino turns prudish Hollywood conventions into a crucial part of the story. Just as the word, quote, rape is never spoken in the movie, Anne is prevented from talking about her experience and spurred by the torment of her enforced silence and the trauma that shatters her sense of identity. She runs away from home. Lupino's drama blends Anne's story with an incisive view of the many societal failures that contribute to the crime, including the unwillingness of the legal system to face the prevalence of rape. Above all, Lupino depicts a culture of leers and wolf whistles and domineering boyfriends, and reveals the widespread and unquestioned aggression that women face in ostensibly consensual courtship, and that's ultimately inseparable from the violence that Anne endures. Mm-hmm. And in the same year, in 1972, of course, we got Last House on the Left, the very first film directed by Wes Craven, which showcased graphic rape scenes for I think, the very first time in American cinema. And here again, I mean, this is very rough, very nasty stuff. And in fact, this is exactly what turned some people off, both critics and audiences, that felt that Hitchcock just went too far with this. Peggy Robertson in this book actually notes that this is one of the most horrific scenes that she had ever seen in a Hitchcock movie. And, it may be the most horrific scene in any Hitchcock movie. And it's still very shocking and absolutely terrifying. I mean, the close-up of the eyes and everything. And then we see her face here where, her tongue is actually stretched out, all the way to the bottom of her chin. Oh, man. It's such a chilling image. And of course, oh, man. Barry Foster, sweating and everything. It's just, I don't blame Michael Caine for turning this role down because he thought the role was disgusting. But come on, it's Hitchcock, man. I mean, you actually turned down the chance to play the villain in a Hitchcock movie. What's wrong with you? But yeah, the production of Frenzy took approximately 13 weeks in 1971, from May to October, I believe, in 1971. And there's actually a whole section in this book that is actually dedicated to the rape sequence, which of course is now over, thank goodness. But let's see here. Give me just one moment. Understanding the theory of montage and having then had considerable practice at it, Hitchcock nevertheless faced a new intellectual challenge with each of his projects. On the set with any one of them, Hitchcock had to capture on film the elements that would become the building blocks for his use of montage in that particular context. And with Frenzy, it's no different. No doubt, having anticipated how arduous might be the task of translating script scene to a piece of 35 millimeter celluloid, and the rape and the murder that you just saw in there, that was actually scene number 30. Hitchcock did not undertake the shooting of the piece until the 7th week of production. Then he devoted 3.5 full days in a row to working out the details of the structure. Commencing on Tuesday, September 7th, with a crew call at 8:30, the first setup was ready at 10:15, with dismissal at 5:20 p.m. The crew completed 9 setups that day and covered a significant part of the opening of the scene. When Rusk appears in Brenda Blaney's inner office at the matrimonial agency, there's a good deal of dialogue between Rusk and Brenda as she slowly becomes aware that she is trapped in a locked office with a violent man. Yeah. What is obvious from carefully examining the continuity sheets is that these two actors, very much like Alec McCowen and Vivian Merchant, seem to have come prepared, seem to have known their lines, and seem to have performed very much professionally. The first shot took only 4 takes. The last one printed. The next one, a closer angle on Rusk as he comes to the door, was captured in but 2 takes. The second one printed. The same was true of the next shot, and the one after that took only 3 takes again with the last one printed. The 5th shot in the sequence, a close-up of Brenda as she makes some excuse to use the phone, was accomplished in only 1 take. Shot number 6, a medium shot of Brenda's desk, took 4 and last printed. And number 7, a much longer dialogue section that concludes with Russ telling Brenda that there's no need to call the police, involves 6 takes. The last 2 shots mark the beginning of Rusk's animalistic attack and the end of the shooting day. Each took 2 takes, each with only the second one printed. All in all, the first day of shooting on this complicated scene had gone well, and the actors proved their professional value, and Hitchcock got the shots that he would need to later orchestrate the sequence in the editing room. But like I said, that went on for 3.5 days. That entire sequence took 3.5 days to film. And now we finally get the well, I think he's second billed, but I mean, I kind of consider him the third lead in this movie, which is who is of course Alec Mccowen, and he passed away in 2017 at the age of 91 here. But he was an English actor. He was born in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, and he attended the Skinner School in Tunbridge Wells. He was known as Squeaker McCowan by his friends and the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. He first appeared on stage in August of 1942 in Patty the Next Best Thing. He appeared in York and Birmingham in 1943 to 1945 and toured India and Burma in the production of Kenneth Horne's West End comedy Love in a Mist. He made his London debut in 1950 at the Arts Theatre as Maxim in Anton Chekhov's Ivanov, and made his first appearances on the New York stage at the Ziegfeld Theatre on December 19th, 1951 as an Egyptian guard in Caesar and Cleopatra, and on 20th December 1951 as the messenger in Antony and Cleopatra. Following a series of roles at the Arts and the Repertory Players, he had rise in success as Henry de Toulouse-Lautrec in Moulin Rouge at the New Theatre, Bromley, and appeared as Barnaby Tucker in The Matchmaker in the Theatre Royal Haymarket, both in 1954. Now, as far as film is concerned, he made his film debut in the 1953 film The Cruel Sea, and after that, he would also appear in other films like The Deep Blue Sea with Vivian Leigh, one of Vivian Leigh's least watched films because it's not available on VHS, DVD, or anywhere. I mean, you would have to catch it on Turner Classic Movies if you wanted to watch it. But anyway, he was also in. He also gave the voice of Bottom in the 1959 version of A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner in 1962, In the Cool of the Day in 1963, The Witches 1966, and right before Frenzy, he was in the sequel to Hawaii with Julie Andrews called The Hawaiians in 1970. Later on, he did Hanover Street 1979. Twelfth Night, 1980. He actually played Q in the non-James Bond film Never Say Never Again, which probably I think most people would probably recognize him nowadays from, as well as Frenzy. And then finally in 1989, Kenneth Branagh had cast him as Bishop of Ely in Henry V. And then he was also in Martin Scorsese's The Age of Innocence. And finally, his last film role was, in fact, in the Martin Scorsese film Gangs of New York, where he played Reverend Raleigh. On May 2nd, 2017, McCowan was accorded a memorial service at St. Paul's Church in Covent Garden, known as the Actors' Church. Of course, Covent Garden was where this film, Frenzy, was shot. McCowan's nephew, Reverend Nigel Mumford, read an affectionate remembrance from McCowan's sister, Jean Mumford's memoirs titled Childhood Memories of Pentos. The tribute was read by Dame Penelope Wilton, followed by a tribute from the playwright Christopher Hampton. Rebecca Treherne sang Bill from Showboat, which was followed by a tribute from the theater critic Michael Bellington and a tribute by the actor Malcolm Sinclair. After final prayers, a plaque McCowan was dedicated by Grigg to the left of the altar. So there we go. Now here on the left here, as I've mentioned many times before, is of course Anna Massey, who plays Barbara Jane Babs Milligan. Now here they are arriving at this hotel called the Coburg, and on the documentary, Anna Massey was actually very. She actually said that she thought that she was going to do the nudity in this film. Because in the hotel room later on in the scene, we see a woman fully naked get out of the bed and go into the bathroom. And that was not Anna Massey. As a matter of fact, pretty much every scene involving nudity and Frenzy was, of course, a model. And in Psycho, Hitchcock had hired a model to double for Janet Leigh in the shower scene. And I love what Joseph Stefano said on the on the Psycho documentary that he thought it was just hilarious seeing Hitchcock on one side and the nude model on the other just talking to each other. Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Wilde. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, the actress playing the hotel manager here is Elsie Randolph, and she was actually in Alfred Hitchcock's 1931 movie made in England called Rich and Strange, where she played the old maid. Let's see here. Yep. Rich and Strange, which was actually one of those Hitchcock titles that was bootlegged for many, many years. And she didn't do a lot of films, but this was her last movie, which was Frenzy, and she passed away in 1982 at the age of 77. But yeah, interesting. She only made 10 films in her career. The first one she did with Hitchcock, and the last one she did with Hitchcock. Yeah, Schaefer does an excellent job setting all this stuff up and all these twists. I mean, here we have Richard Blaney giving the porter his clothes to have them washed and everything, and of course this spurns the suspicion of many who thinks that he's just trying to get rid of evidence. He just had to arrive at Bren's office right after she was murdered. It's just coincidentally. So yeah, okay, this is Anna Massey in the bed. We can see her face here. But then we switch to a nude model as she puts on her stockings here. But Anna Massey said she was willing to actually do the nudity here. And Anna Massey, by the way, she won a BAFTA award for the role of Edith Hope in the 1986 TV adaptation of Anita Bruckner's novel Hotel du Lac, a role that one of her co-stars had said, quote, could have been written for her. But this is her best-known role right here, absolutely. Although she had no formal training at either drama school or in repertory, Anna Massey made her first appearance on stage in May of 1955 at the age of 17 as Jane in The Reluctant Debutante, subsequently making her first London appearance in the same play at the Cambridge Theatre in May 1955, and, quote, was suddenly famous. So she became an overnight sensation, basically, because of that. She then left the cast in London to repeat her performance in New York in October of 1956. In the 1990s, she appeared with Alan Bennett in a dramatized reading of T.S. Eliot's and Virginia Woolf's Letters in a production at the Charlton Festival devised by Patrick Garland. Several of her early film roles were in mystery thrillers. She made her cinema debut in the Scotland Yard film Gideon's Day as Sally, daughter of Jack Hawkins's detective inspector. The director was her godfather, John Ford. She played a potential murder victim in Michael Powell's cult thriller Peeping Tom, which of course was the other film from 1960 that had garnered so much controversy along with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in issuing a new look at sexuality and violence on film. And of course, both films actually deal with voyeurism, as a matter of fact, along with Rear Window, of course. And she also appeared in Otto Preminger's Bunny Lake is Missing. I love Bunny Lake is Missing. That is a great, great movie from Otto Preminger, which came out in 1965, where Laurence Olivier is a police officer investigating the case of a mother who is searching for her missing daughter, but the Laurence Olivier begins to suspect that the daughter never even existed. The rock and the music was done by the Zombies, who actually appear in the film. If you've never seen Bunny Lake is Missing, check it out. It's terrific. It's just terrific. And in the documentary on the film's release, Massey mentioned that she originally auditioned for the much smaller role of Monica, which is, of course, the role that Jean Marsh had with the giant glasses and everything. She also noted that her character's nude scenes in Frenzy were performed by body doubles, of course. She appeared alongside her brother Daniel. They played siblings in the horror film The Vault of Horror, directed by Roy Ward Baker in 1973. One of Massey's assets as an actress was her, quote, extraordinary voice. It was so listenable. Although Massey's parts were varied, her, quote, cut glass English accent conveyed a cold and repressed character on screen. Michael Billington of The Guardian characterized her work as being informed by, quote, stillness, such as the National Theatre's production of Harold Piner's A Kind of Alaska. Mm-hmm. And after Frenzy, she had done A Doll's House. She was in A Little Romance with Laurence Olivier in 1979. She is also in a movie called 5 Days, One Summer, which starring Sean Connery, which I will be doing an audio commentary in a month or two here, because that is one of the films released by the Ladd Company, and I'm going to be doing audio commentaries for all 24 Ladd Company productions throughout the summer. She was also played Mrs. Norris in Mansfield Park, Miss Pross in the 1989 version of A Tale of Two Cities, Mountains of the Moon, where she played Queen Victoria. And some of her biggest roles actually came in the 21st century, because she got cast as Miss Prism in The Importance of Being Earnest. And she was also in the Christian Bale thriller The Machinist. That's the film where Christian Bale lost like 60 pounds, and he almost appeared like a walking skeleton. Really, really good movie. She was also in Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. Let's see, The Oxford Murders, and I thought she had one more big one here. No, I think. Okay. I think the Oxford Murders was her last theatrical film role. And she passed away at the age of 73 in 2011. Like I said, sadly, a lot of those who worked on Frenzy are no longer with us. It's just a select few. Just a select few. Mm-hmm. At any rate, Cliff Booth, I want to say hi to you in the chat, sir. I enjoyed this movie a lot. I was always made to believe later Hitchcock was not worth the time. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, here again, like I said, I literally grew up watching his films. I mean, everything from the 39 Steps to The Lady Vanishes to, Suspicion, Notorious, Rope, James Stewart film Rope. All well worth watching. But here again, I think North by Northwest is number one for me. Mainly just because of the fact that I just, I'm so glued to the screen watching that movie. It's just unbelievable. But of course, Anthony Schaefer, the screenwriter of Frenzy, actually complained a lot about North by Northwest to Hitch, who of course would defend all the plot twists later, as I just read in this book. So, okay, slightly off topic. I think there's only one issue with North by Northwest. In most Hitchcock films, and North by Northwest is of course one of them, there's always a scene that I think is rather unnecessary, or rather too much, I guess you could say. And all his films have that kind of aspect. I mean, Psycho, a lot of people don't like the scene with the psychiatrist at the end. I don't mind it, particularly when you think about that. Well, in the 1960s, people needed an explanation as to what the hell they just saw. What scene is it in North by Northwest I have a problem with? It's the sequence where right after Cary Grant leaves the United Nations, and we discover in this governmental office that George Kaplan doesn't exist. That he's just a fake spy that this government agency has been using, and that throughout the rest of the film, Cary Grant is basically chasing an invisible man. And I was wondering, wouldn't it have been great if that entire sequence was scrapped and that the audience still believed that George Kaplan was a real person? I think that would have been a great revelation later in the film when Cary Grant realizes from I forget the actor's name, but he's so wonderful in that with the glasses and everything. He was in Tarantula, I believe. And he tells him that, there's no such person as George Kaplan. And Cary Grant's like, well, what do you mean there's no such person? I've been in his hotel room. He's got short sleeves and dandruff. Oh, and by the way, when one character mentions dandruff in this movie, Hitchcock said that he wanted that word to be pronounced. And let's see now. Trying to remember which actress this one is. Oh man, I've got so many names I got to remember. Forgive me just 1 second. Oh, this is Billie Whitelaw. That's right. Yeah. So, okay, Billie Whitelaw. She passed away in 2014. She was another English actress, and she actually worked in close collaboration with the Irish playwright Samuel Beckett for 25 years, and regarded as one of the foremost interpreters of his works. And but she's probably best known for for her portrayal of Mrs. Baylock, the demonic nanny in the 1976 horror classic The Omen, directed by Richard Donner. That's probably her most famous film role. But she had started out in the 1950s along with Anna Massey here. She had done films such as... actually, most of these films are completely unknown to me. The thing is, a lot of these English actors, I mean, they made, of course, movies in England. And, of course, a lot of these movies, would rarely get any play time in the States. But she did do the television movie The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. She was also in Twisted Nerve with Barry Foster, which I mentioned before. She was also Queen Marie Antoinette in the in the Gene Wilder comedy Start the Revolution Without Me, which I've never seen before, but from what I understand is actually pretty funny. After The Omen, she was in the 1980 version of A Tale of Two Cities, where she played Madame Therese Defarge. And she also gave the voice of Agra in The Dark Crystal, the Jim Henson, Frank Oz collaboration, which has become a real cult movie. She was also in the 1987 version of The Secret Garden, 1988's The Dressmaker, the 1996 movie version of Jane Eyre, which I am not a fan of, by the way. In fact, I think that's the worst version of Jane Eyre out there. And she was also in Quills. And her very last role, and I'm actually shocked by this, her very last role, she played Joyce Cooper in the movie Hot Fuzz, which, of course, was written and directed by Edgar Wright and starring Simon Pegg and Jim Broadbent. And I find that hilarious because in that movie is also my man Timothy Dalton, who, of course, I've had a man crush since since I was a teenager and discovered him in James Bond. I've had a total man crush on Timothy Dalton since then. But he was Vanessa Redgrave's partner for 15 years, from 1971 to 1986. But yeah, her last movie was in Hot Fuzz. Yeah. And let's see here. And of course, the actor who we just saw, he's just leaving here in the role of Felix Forsyth. That is Bernard Cribbins, who is still with us. He's 93 years old. He is an OBE. During the 60s, Cribbins became known in the UK for his successful novelty records, including The Hole in the Ground and Right Said Fred, and appearances in comedy films including Two-Way Stretch and the Carry On series. His notable screen roles include Albert Perks in The Railway Children, the barman in Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy, and pretentious hotel guest Mr. Hutchison in the Fawlty Towers episode The Hotel Inspectors. And on television, he was a regular and prolific reader for the BBC series Jackanory from 1966 to 1991. He narrated the children's program The Wombies and played the title role in the CB's series Old Jack's Boat from 2013 to 2015. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he's yeah. I mean, as late as 2018, he was still working. Still working now. Really extraordinary. But here we go back to Alec Mccowen. Now, okay, I forget which documentary it was, but I mean, I've read and I've seen in several documentaries about Hitchcock's fascination with food and how he, in many films, he would have the actors actually eat on screen. Um, and of course, in this film, Alec Mccowen, he's enjoying some I want to say bangers and mash, just because I love the sound of an English plate like that. I don't think that is it. I know there's bangers and eggs there. He's basically just having breakfast while still delivering dialogue. Now, let me tell you something about eating on screen. For an actor, that's not easy. Because now think about Frenzy is of course there weren't that many takes, so he probably didn't have to consume a lot of food. But on screen, he actually consumes a lot of food because in multiple scenes he has to eat. I mean, one of the great highlights of this movie, I think, is the fact that his wife keeps on coming from the kitchen with these delicacies, and we'll see her a bit later, but. Yeah, she would come out with all these delicacies that he would have to, figure out how to how to basically slice and consume. Here's the actor Bernard Cribbins as Felix Forsythe. Yeah, and he's a real bastard. I mean, in this movie. Well, I mean, look, okay. Let's go back to John Finch's character for a moment, because a lot of people have noted that this is one of Hitchcock's least likable protagonists. Now, early on in the film, as you saw, Babs kept on defending him and say, hey, look, he always drinks, but at the same time, he always pays for the drinks. He always puts the money in the till. And when he left, he was so pissed off, he took out, 20 pounds that he had loaned him, and he just crumpled them up and just threw them behind the bar. I mean, and then later when he gets outside, he actually says, I had to give it back to him because he would have thought I wouldn't have it at all. So from those scenes, I mean, the thing is that, okay, John Finch I don't think he's a cad. And like I said, we root for him just because of the fact that he is an innocent man who's being accused of a series of necktie murders all around London. But in fact, a lot of critics have cited him as one of Hitchcock's least likable protagonists. I wanted to get one thing here. Give me just 1 second. I apologize. Okay. Among the many oft-related stories surrounding the persona of Alfred Hitchcock, perhaps the most persistent was his supposed remark that, quote, all actors are cattle. His rejoinder was even more widely reported. I didn't say actors are cattle. What I said was actors should be treated like cattle. Carol Lombard, whom Hitchcock adored, once famously poked fun at the director's purported attitude by constructing a little corral on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. In the corral were 3 calves, each garlanded with the same one of the main actors in the film, Lombard's included. That stunt, of course, merely added to the notoriety of Hitchcock's remark. It might well have also contributed to the ongoing dilemma regarding casting that Hitchcock had experienced throughout his Hollywood period. He often complained that the A-list actors were reluctant to work with him because they felt he was making B-list pictures. In addition, Hitchcock had developed a reputation for being a somewhat aloof director. In the age of the method actor, this could cause anxiety, as it quite obviously did on the set of Torn Curtain, to cite the most notorious example. Hitch is impatient with the affectations of the method actors was well known, but apparently the exchanges between the director and his expensive and studio-chosen star, Paul Newman, proved to be even more disastrous than either one could have expected. This was not the first time that Hitchcock had developed frustration over the method employed by some of his performers. But I'm going to stop that real quick to mention, I love this reveal right here when Babs leaves the pub, and who's right behind her but Robert Rusk. And that's when the audience is like, oh no, she's going to be his next victim. But a memorable victim in many ways we will see later when she ends up in a sack full of potatoes. The promotion for this film was actually hilarious because they had shot several. One of the previews I mentioned earlier was Hitchcock floating in the Thames River, about to talk about his quote new film Frenzy. But there was another trailer done which showed some guy at a stand buying a bunch of neckties, and then Hitchcock just slowly turned to the cameras. He uses them to strangle women. If you look at some of the trailers for Hitchcock films, they are just brilliant. Just look at the trailer for Psycho, and it's not, you don't see anything from the film. You just see him wandering around the set talking about, oh, this happened here and this happened there, and and this picture has great significance because he always stops short. I don't know if you know it, Babs, but you're my type of woman. And this is one of the great shots of Frenzy as the camera comes down the stairs very elegantly, very exquisitely. Comes down the stairs, this very complicated backwards shot as we go out the door. And this is, of course, 3 Henrietta Street in Covent Garden, which was the flat of the Necktie Strangler. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great shot. One of Hitchcock's best. Like I said, I think Frenzy is curiously just, not discussed. It's not brought up near as often as Rear Window or Vertigo or Psycho or The Birds. I think this movie is way better than The Birds. All that, all those effects in The Birds, I just don't think hold up. And the story's fine. I just no, I don't. I'm not a big fan of any of that, projection work in The Birds whatsoever. But I like how he holds up the glass. Like, there's some marvelous comedy here. Marvelous comedy with the wife with the food and everything, as they discuss all this stuff about the necktie murder and Richard Blaney, and like, oh. Like, what the hell is that? I'm sorry, that just does not look appetizing. It does not beat my taste buds whatsoever. It's like, oh, that thing looks still alive. We have identified as leaving the matrimony at the time his ex was killed. He's still talking as he's looking at this stuff. And we have the evidence of the face powder at the Salvation Army hostel. Yeah. Oh, man. Now, the actress playing, oh, God. This is more, oh, God. This is more gruesome than some of the bloody moments in Hitchcock movies. Whenever she brings out food to him, it's like, oh, like, really? Oh. He's like about to cry. Oh. Just plops it right back in. Yep, there you go. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the actress playing Mrs. Oxford, who is constantly bringing him all this food, played by Vivian Merchant, and she was another English actress. She achieved considerable success in the 1950s to the 1970s winning the BAFTA TV Award for Best Actress in 1964. And she was in the movie, the very famous comedy Alfie, starring Michael Caine, where she actually received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. And she also won the BAFTA Award for Most Promising Newcomer for Alfie. In 1967, she starred in the Broadway production of Pinter's The Homecoming and received a Tony Award nomination. Her other films included Accident, 1967, The Offense, The Homecoming, and The Maids. Suffering from depression and alcoholism as her marriage ended, she sadly died in 1982, 2 years after her divorce. And she wasn't in many films. I mean, she was in Alfie, which of course she won numerous awards for as Lily Clamacroft. Aside from that, in Frenzy, though, she only did 6-7 films. I mean, but she is absolutely very, very memorable right here. Chuckles weekly. Okay, this one looks slightly more appetizing than the last, but Hitchcock's camera just loves staring at this food. It just loves paying attention to the food, and of course his reactions to her serving him these things. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful, just wonderful. At any rate, let me go ahead and do a timestamp real quick. We are approximately 1 hour and 10 minutes into Frenzy. 1 hour and 10 minutes, and we have approximately 45 minutes left to go. Anybody out there in the chat, I mean, Cliff Booth, it's great to see you, but anybody out there in chat, please let me know what you think of Frenzy. I mean, have you seen this before? What do you think of it? What do you think of the performances? Please let me know, and I'll be more than happy to share your responses on screen here. Mm-hmm. But I want to thank you all absolutely for coming out tonight. And yes, here is Rusk carrying Bab's body out in this potato sack, which he is about to dump. And of course, what we find out, that's a great shot of London, by the way. Look at that in the background, up at the top there, where you actually see more of the city outside of Covent Garden. Oh, it's just wonderful, just wonderful. Mm-hmm. And I think we did it as far as the entire cast is concerned. Hold on one moment. There was something else I wanted to. Let's see. There's this one particular section about John Finch that I wanted to read. Okay, sorry, I'm going silent here. I'm going to read another passage here. Let's see. Yeah, there's this one segment I wanted to read about the potato truck, which of course is coming up here. Yeah. I should have put markers in this book. That's what I should have done. Hitchcock's employment of mise-en-scene and the moving camera in Frenzy is simply exquisite. An examination of two of the sequences should clearly demonstrate his artistry. First, the gliding pullback down the stairs and out the door of Rusk's flat is a moment in the film that seems to have caught the eye of virtually every critic who saw it. Perhaps the sincerest form of flattery came from those who did not care for the film itself, but recognized the power of the sequence. Donald Spoto described it as, quote, the justly famous single shot in which the camera descends, seemingly without a cut, to the ground level out the building's front door and then to the opposite side of Henrietta Street. That is an accurate depiction, if rather pedestrian. It somewhat plays the, quote, moment of pure cinema that is illustrated by the articulation of the shot, creating what John Russell Taylor called that, quote, extraordinary shot, and executing it took no small effort. The shot itself is a part of scene number 82 in the script. And examining the total sequence, however, it is useful to look at the previous 3 scenes as well in order to get a sense of how Hitchcock orchestrated the progression to the dramatic climax. The first of these is in scene 79, in itself a well-choreographed piece of cinema driven by the power of moving camera, and in this case by a very clever use of the zoom lens. It involves Rusk and Babs. She has just emerged from the pub after an angry conversation with her boss. Her head fills with most of the screen as we hear a voice, seemingly out of nowhere, ask, got a place to stay? The power of the zoom lens, with its capacity to compress distance, has hidden Rusk from our eyes. He is revealed only as Babs turns to address his question. From this point on, Rusk and Babs converse about her situation, the camera accompanying them in a fairly standard tracking movement. Scene number 80 continues their conversation, and here, Hitchcock demonstrated his mastery of the moving camera as his actors threaded their way through the crowded Covent Garden market. It should perhaps be pointed out again that one of the reasons so many directors avoid long, complicated moving camera shots is that so much crowd control is involved. Here, for instance, had one grocer dropped his bag or had one technician turned the wrong way, the take would have been immediately terminated, and yet another would have to be set up. But this sequence, like the rape murder sequence with the this sequence with the potato sack, this took another 3.5 days to film. Those were the 2 most complicated sequences in the entire movie. The second great example in Frenzy of Hitchcock's ability to orchestrate a scene through his application of the classic principles of montage occurs during the celebrated potato truck sequence, which we are watching right now. Comprised of scenes 98 through 120 in the script, it was the last full section of the film to be tackled during the long production period. It involved a total of 12 days shooting, in whole or in part, and it turned out to be the most grueling part of the production schedule, since many of the scenes had to be shot at night on the open roads around London. Now, to clarify and to fix something I said earlier, the shot, the famous shot going down the stairs, and the shot of the rape and the murder, those took 3.5 days. This took 12 days, though. And there was a lot of pickups later in post-production with this and everything. But this is just all great stuff. I mean, you see him like going into the potato bag and her foot gets out. And that was another one of the promotional things that Hitchcock did when he was in Covent Garden, where he was going through all the fruits and vegetables, and he got out a potato and then just a foot comes out. Sort of like what we see in Fargo with the foot out of the wood chipper. That's kind of what we saw, and just pops out. Now that's how you promote a mystery thriller. That's how you do it. Let's see. Yeah, shot at night on the open roads around London. That meant, of course, that the production activities would once again be held hostage to the fickle weather over southern England, in by then early autumn. So the crew had to have alternative studio work ready to be scheduled as needed. The potato truck sequence is an example of pure montage. Its power comes from the intercutting of dozens of individual pieces of film into a rhythmic and meaningful whole. Gathering those discrete pieces was the task that occupied Hitchcock and the crew over those 12 days, and many of them were the grueling, quote, extended days That is, ones during which the crew went into overtime in order to complete the scheduled work. Now, I'm going to stop there just real quick. Oh, this is such a great sequence. But according to union rules, at least in England, and I learned this when I saw the Star Wars documentary, Empire of Dreams, is that you can have a crew until 6 p.m. and you have to let them go unless you're in the middle of a shot. At that point, the director could ask for the crew to finish the shot. And a lot of the times, at least in Star Wars' case, they would turn they would turn George Lucas down because a lot of them just didn't like George Lucas when he shot Star Wars. Now, in this case, though, the crew members, a lot of times Hitchcock would just end the working day in the 5 o'clock hour. But sometimes when you had night shoots like this, they would get together at 7 p.m. and then they would break at 4 a.m. in the morning. So, this is a very, very complicated sequence right here. The first attempt at scene number 98 took place at the end of the 7th week of shooting on Friday, September 17th, 1971. It was scheduled as a night shoot. During most of that arduous night, several sequences related to scene 52 were undertaken first. Ironically, this scene, a girl leaving Rusk's apartment in her underwear, did not make the final cut of the film. 2 takes of scene number 98, though, were also shot that night. The scene shows Rusk hurriedly leaving his flat, looking around frantically, according to the script, to see whether or not the truck is left. He has just realized that his tie pin, which would become an incriminating bit of evidence, must still be in the hands of the murdered Babs. Since the scene of the girl leaving the flat, the one eventually cut from the film, was shot as an exterior, Hitchcock had his crew make 2 attempts to capture this short shot of Rusk during the same shooting session. The office diary for the date simply listed night shooting Rusk's apartment. A full week and a half would pass before Hitchcock returned to the potato truck sequence. In the intervening days, he shot various interiors, including the police station, the inspector's office at Scotland Yard, the courtroom, the Salvation Army hostel, the Coburg Hotel, the Hilton, and the prison hospital. On Wednesday, September 29th, he returned to scene 98. The crew recorded but 1 take of the scene at the very end of the shooting day, shortly before dismissal at 5:20. The real work on the truck sequence began on Thursday, September 30th. The call was for 8:30 a.m. The first setup was ready at 9:45, and the crew managed, in a remarkable display of efficiency, this late in the production schedule, to complete 20 setups by dismissal time at 5:20. A summary of the continuity sheet for that day clearly illustrates this efficiency. All but 4 of the shots were completed in 1 take. 3 of them took 2 takes and 1 took 3 takes. Most of the day was devoted to scene 99. 2 takes of scene 98 were dispatched with the beginning of the shoot, a scene that takes place inside the truck as Rusk struggles with the body that he had stuffed into the potato sack. While Rusk had hoped to accomplish his grim task before the truck would leave Covent Garden, he fails to do so, and the scene also includes his reaction to the initial movement of the truck out of the parking area and onto the local road. It is a complicated scene with many close-ups, each one requiring a new camera setup. By the end of the day, the scene was not quite complete, and the crew returned to it on Friday, October 1st. 9 setups were devoted to scene 99 on that day, marking the end of the 10th week of shooting. But by mid-afternoon, Hitchcock felt satisfied that scene 99 was complete, and he went on to the other shots in the long sequence. As it turned out, the scene had not been quite fully captured. Hitchcock sent his crew back to the studio on October 13th to record 2 more takes. Only then was the difficult and essential scene number 99 ready for post-production. Capturing the rest of the potato truck sequence involved some of the most grueling days of the entire production period. Friday, October 1st was very much like the previous day. An efficient crew systematically captured each of the required shots as called for by the director. The first setup was ready early at 9:38 in the morning, and the dismissal was at 5:20 in the afternoon. 12 setups were undertaken, and once again, most of them required but 1 take. 8 setups were devoted to scene 99, completing the action from the previous day. Next on the schedule was scene number 101, Another complicated piece of business for both the crew and the actor, as can be ascertained by examining the description on the continuity sheet. Camera shooting down onto Rusk with his head inside Babs's sack. The truck stops. Rusk comes out of the sack. As it starts again, he is thrown backwards towards the rear of the truck. This took 5 takes, with only the last one printed. The day ended with 1 take each of scenes 103, 104, and 105, each one a continuation of the struggle between Rusk and the dead body in the potato sack. The crew was given the weekend off. They had completed 10 weeks of shooting with only 3 more on the schedule. The 11th week began ominously. The progress report for October 4th concluded with this note. Mr. Hitchcock, unable to work today as he is suffering from the gout. Dr. Southward was called on Sunday to Claridge's to attend Mr. Hitchcock. The shooting that was scheduled for that day was abandoned, and all outstanding inserts were shot under the direction of Colin Brewer, the first assistant director. The insurance company were notified at 9:30 on Monday by Ron Alday. All right, I'm going to take a short break and have something to drink here. Now, on a sad note, one thing that happened during Frenzy's production is that Hitchcock's wife, Alma Revelle, they had met when he was working at a British studio in the 1920s. She was an editor, and he actually had a lower rank than she had. So as much as Hitchcock wanted to talk to her, he was unable to do it. But when he became an assistant director, he asked Alma to edit the picture with him, and they would end up collaborating for 60 years after that. Sadly, in 1972, during the pre-production of Frenzy, Alma had a minor stroke. Now, it should be noted that Hitchcock never did a film without his wife's approval. If Alma didn't like something, it was completely scrapped. So, I mean, he largely depended upon Alma for during all phases of production, and but sadly, she had a stroke during the production and early on in the production period. And after that, Hitchcock seemed to have lost interest in his work at that point. I mean, he still showed up to work. He still did the shots and everything. But, of course, the interesting thing about Hitchcock's movies is that all the work was practically done in pre-production. He was very, very meticulous when it came to preparation and everything. And so a lot of the work was done in pre-production. However, by the time they finished shooting Frenzy in October of 1971 and into 1972, when Universal was going to do promotion and everything, she had recovered enough to be able to do publicity for Frenzy. Now, it should be noted that the last 3 productions that Hitchcock had done with Universal before Frenzy were not well received at the time, and they included Marnie from 1964 with Sean Connery, Torn Curtain with Paul Newman, and Topaz in 1969. And today, a lot of film scholars do not consider those well. Marnie has gotten a reassessment in recent decades and is now considered one of Hitchcock's finest. But Torn Curtain and Topaz are both considered misfires. So when Universal got Frenzy, I'm sure they were a little apprehensive about releasing another Hitchcock film, but luckily everybody at Universal, when they saw the completed print of Frenzy, they loved it. They thought it was a return to form for the master and everything. And it got exceptionally high marks from the studio heads and everything. I mean, very few changes were made. Very few things were changed in post-production. And thus, when the film was prepped for its release on June 20th, 1972, the buzz surrounding Frenzy was really, really high. I mean, people were saying, "Oh, this is a return to form." The master is back. He went home to England to film this movie, and he's now back on top of his game after several misfires. And in fact, when Frenzy opened, the critics were largely very, very positive about the movie. Yeah, they were actually very, very positive about it. In a May 2nd, 1972 memorandum to Universal Regional Offices, Hitchcock assistant Peggy Robertson asked that, quote, all reviews of Frenzy be sent to his office. She, of course, meant the Hitchcock suite of offices at Universal Studios. These clippings now occupy two full folders of the Hitchcock papers housed at the Margaret Herrick Library in Beverly Hills. The vast majority of the notices are positive evaluations of Frenzy. In what many refer to as the authorized biography, Hitchcock was still alive when it was written, and he and the author had long been friends as well as professional associates. John Russell Taylor notes the favorable reception that Frenzy received. Quote, the press were unanimous in hailing it as a fantastic return to form. And with press and public alike, it proved his most popular film since Psycho. Taylor would have known a little something about these reviews since he wrote one of them himself. His piece in the Times of London under the headline Hitchcock Magic is Intact concludes that Frenzy is an example of, quote, a great director again making a film worthy of his great talents. It was not, though, as if Taylor were simply promoting the work of a professional associate. He was rather joining so many others in their collective relief that Hitchcock had not made another Torn Curtain or Topaz. David Robinson in the Financial Times echoes Taylor's sentiment and celebrates the fact that Hitchcock remained, quote, an artist who retained such freshness, vitality, and magisterial control over his audience after 50 years in pictures. Another professional friend of the director, Arthur Knight, wrote a fine appreciation for Saturday Review in which he repeats publicly what he had intimated privately to Hitchcock. The great thing is that everything works. For me, Frenzy is Hitchcock's best since North by Northwest. And North by Northwest, I have always counted among my favorite Hitchcocks. Vincent Canby in the New York Times writes that, quote, Frenzy is Hitchcock in the dazzling, lucid form that is as much the meaning as the method of his films. This was the standard motif of so many of the reviews of Frenzy in the daily and weekly press. Hitchcock had made a great film, as he once did without fail, and it was a pleasure to be able to report this fact. Under the headline, The Return of Alfred the Great, Richard Schickel summarizes the widespread proclamation in his review for Life magazine. After Flat Marmy, Mechanical Torn Curtain, and Diffused Topaz, Frenzy is like a homecoming, not just to the London where Hitchcock began his career almost half a century ago, but to that country of the imagination which is uniquely his. Gene Siskel says that much the same thing in the Chicago Tribune. Hitchcock, after a string of 4 indifferent films, is back providing grand entertainment. Many of the reviewers commented upon the screenplay. Siskel, for example, announces that, quote, Alfred Hitchcock's latest film contains the one ingredient missing from today's movies, a good story. Arthur Knight writes that the film, quote, has been scripted with unflagging ingenuity by Anthony Schaefer. A.D. Murphy in Variety simply and directly labels the script, quote, finely structured. These remarks about the screenplay raise again, of course, the question as to the working relationship between Hitchcock and Schaefer, and beyond that, the proper attribution for the success of the project. One reviewer addresses it directly. Hitchcock's scriptwriter was the noted author of Sleuth, Anthony Schaefer. How did the two men work together? Hitchcock is always jealous of his authorship. David Robinson addresses the same question, answering it himself. One of the mysteries of Hitchcock has always been his ability to work with quite different writers. They have included Thornton Wilder, Ben Hecht, Dorothy Parker, though at different times his loyalist collaborators have been his wife Alma Revelle, Charles Bennett, and John Michael Hayes, and yet remains solely and completely the auteur of all he does, so that it is possible to trace the same preoccupations and themes from the very start of his career in films. The screenplay of Frenzy, for instance, is credited to Anthony Shaffer, but at every point it is unmistakably Hitchcock's own. As we have seen, the collaboration between Hitchcock and Shaffer was quite pleasant and effective, certainly one of the least troubled of Hitchcock's career. There were easily enough accolades accorded the finished project to satisfy each of them, and nothing in the official record suggests either artist had any regrets. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case. Hitchcock would have worked with Shaffer again on the project that would become Family Plot, but it seems that the representatives of the two parties could not reach an agreement to the terms of any contract. In any case, the contributions of both the screenwriter and the director were each singled out for praise by a substantial number of viewers, but not all. Frenzy certainly had its share of detractors, and some of them were quite vitriolic. Gary Arnold, writing for the Washington Post, for example, begins this way, quote, "The new Alfred Hitchcock film Frenzy at the MacArthur has a promising opening sequence and a witty curtain line, but the material in between is decidedly pedestrian. The reviewers," he continues, quote, "who have been hailing Frenzy as a new classic and the triumphant return of the master of suspense are, to put it kindly, exaggerating the occasion." Arnold reserves some of the most pointed remarks for the script, the very script that had been praised by so many. Shaffer, who wrote Sleuth, would appear to be a suitable collaborator. But Frenzy is very shallow stuff. The dialogue is glib and overwritten, and there's precious little mystery, suspense, or credibility in the mystery story. Again, no, I disagree with that. His conclusion is sharp and is a bit poignant. Quote, "It would be pleasant to greet Frenzy as a triumphant comeback, but under the circumstances it would be misleading." Tim DeMont begins his Hartford Courant review with the comment, "Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy, sad to say, rests a bit too much on laurels and not enough on solid foundation." He felt that the film was, quote, "as flat as forgotten ale from a combination of excess length and scanty suspense." He complains equally of Shaffer's contribution. "Nowhere in Shaffer's script is there the gut-stiffening tension of The Man Who Knew Too Much or the breathtaking momentum of North by Northwest." R.H. Gardner's review in the Baltimore Sun could be summarized by its headline, "Alfred Hitchcock's latest thriller, less thrilling than funny." Gardner calls Frenzy, quote, "a mediocre thriller, but one that contains an inspired comic segment," and observes that Shaffer's screenplay was hackneyed and the plot was crude. Even a relatively negative review, though, could contain some elements of praise for the film. Louise Sweeney in the Christian Science Monitor, for example, concedes that Hitchcock is such a brilliant director, but goes on to say that it seems almost rude to point out that this new film is not in a class with the best of his films. It's no suspicion or notorious. It is, though, she concludes, unmistakably a movie, and one by a master technician. It was this sort of critique of the film that was shared by some of Frenzy's severest critics. Hitchcock's taking advantage of the looser production code that existed in the 70s, as opposed to the 1950s, led to a good deal of criticism on what saw as excessive violence or unnecessary nudity. As one critic puts it, quote, "Fretful students of antisocial behavior contend that cinematic examples of sex and sadism spawn real-life examples of sex and sadism." We're not going to go back to the age-old argument that violence on screen causes violence in real life. I mean, just to quote Joe Bob Briggs, "Hell, if violent movies made you violent, I would have committed 97 murders by now." The most pointed attack along those lines was published in the New York Times under a July 30th, 1972 headline that raised the question, "Does Frenzy degrade women?" Ooh. The writer, a professor of English at a local New York City college, concludes that it, and many films like it, indeed contribute to a pervasive fear that women have of being overcome by stronger predatory males, and that certain films can promote this sort of behavior. It is quite possible a certain percentage of the movie's audience is really titillated by the loving camera treatment of the murder, the lingering focus on the slowly expiring victim, the flashback strangulation, and the frequent shots of nude, dead female bodies. Hitchcock defenders would, of course, question the phrase loving treatment of the murder. But the point is one that has continued to be raised about the relationship of certain matters on the screen, sex and violence being the most obvious examples, to the reality of life off the screen. To what extent this question relates to Hitchcock's work and that work's relation is in turn to women is a matter to which we shall return. The subject of negative reviews cannot be closed here without mentioning one of the most negative of them all, though. The author of the original novel upon which Frenzy was based was less than pleased with the finished project. This is the actual letter that he wrote, and I thought this was a joke. Sir, I wish I could share John Russell Taylor's enthusiasm for Hitchcock's distasteful film Frenzy. I endured 116 minutes of it at a press showing, and it was, at least to me, a most painful experience. I do speak with some authority on the subject. It so happens I am the author of the novel Goodbye Piccadilly, Farewell Leicester Square, on which the film is based. Mr. Hitchcock employed Mr. Schaefer to adapt my book for the screen, apparently because the latter's successful stage play Sleuth. The result on the screen is appalling. The dialogue is a curious amalgam of an old Aldwych farce Dixon of Dock Green, and that almost forgotten No Hiding Place. I would like to ask Mr. Hitchcock and Mr. Schaefer what happened between book and script to the authentic London characters I created. Finally, I want to disassociate myself with Mr. Schaefer's grotesque misrepresentation of Scotland Yard offices. Now, this scene right here, this was actually in the in the documentary for Psycho. Because here again, going back to the whole relationship between Hitchcock and food and having his actors actually consume food on screen. He's still talking about all the murders with his wife here. This bit they actually put in the documentary. It's when he was talking about Babs suffering from rigor mortis, and when Barry Foster was, of course, cracking his fingers and everything, the corpse was deep in rigor mortis. He had to break the fingers of the right hand to retrieve what they held, and she breaks a breadstick and puts it in her mouth and starts crunching it. And he just kind of looks at her like, yeah. And it's basically here where he begins to suspect that John Finch is, of course, not the necktie murderer, but actually Oxford's character, Robert Rusk, played by Barry Foster. Whew. All right, just to give everybody a timestamp real quick, we are 1 hour and 42 minutes into Frenzy. 1 hour and 42 minutes, and we have approximately 13 minutes left to go. Yeah, forgive me, I'm almost out of breath here. Well, like I said, we only have 15 minutes left. Anybody out there in the chat, please let me know that you're here. I mean, say anything you want about Frenzy, and I'll be sure to put it on the screen here. I mean, I'm so happy that there were a good number of people that came out tonight for this, because really happy about that. Let's see. I think I'm pretty much done quoting from the book now. See, this is a great book, and anybody that's a fan of Frenzy, I highly recommend you pick it up. But as I was reading some of the passages, I mean, of course, a lot of them are rather repetitive in terms of, how many shots, how many pickups, and that kind of thing. I mean, that kind of technical detail, I don't think most people actually care about. But, oh, that's my favorite part. When he spits out the... That's hilarious. That's just wonderful. That's just wonderful. But actually, here's probably the last actor that we haven't talked about yet, and this is Michael Bates as Sergeant Spearman. And he was also in A Clockwork Orange. If you remember, he plays the guy that was taking Alex into prison. You know, he was telling him things about, you know, like when he puts a pen on the table, is like, pick it up and put it down properly. You know, he would say things like that. I mean, he's wonderful, wonderful in that. Yeah, he played Bates in A Clockwork Orange. And he was also in Bedazzled, the famous comedy with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. Hammerhead, 1968. Salt and Pepper, 1968. Battle of Britain, which also had the same composer, by the way. In Patton, he played Field Marshal Sir Bernard Montgomery. And of course, in Clockwork Orange, he was Chief Guard Barnes. The 1973 comedy film with a great title called No Sex Please, We're British. Fall of Eagles, and The Body Adventures of Tom Jones. If you ever want to see a softcore version of Tom Jones with Joan Collins as Black Bess, that's the movie for you. And his last film was actually Gulliver's Travels in 1977, where he contributed a voice to that. Yeah, that was an animated production of Gulliver's Travels. So, But yeah, in A Clockwork Orange, he has so much disdain for Alex's character, even after he becomes supposedly rehabilitated. Yeah. But Clockwork Orange was shot by Kubrick only a year before this, and did a commentary on that last year if you want to check it out. Yeah. And so his wife is going to enjoy the rest of the martini that she made for him. Oh, I expected to give him some money, but there's no real to compensate in cases like these. Poor man. Well, since we are now, I think we have about 10 minutes left here. Yeah, we're less than 10 minutes to go before the end of Frenzy. I wanted to say, as far as upcoming commentaries, next week I will be doing Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, because that will be the next Lad Company commentary I do, following up Chariots of Fire from last weekend. So yeah, next week I will be doing Blade Runner. Originally, I wanted to do Blade Runner today because, in fact, it was released on June 25th, 1982. And so today is actually the 40th anniversary of Blade Runner. But you know what? To be perfectly honest, I haven't seen Blade Runner in many, many, many years. And so I'm going to need about a week to watch it several times and to do a shit ton of research on it before I sit down to do Blade Runner. It's probably going to be my most challenging commentary because, and it's not that I dislike Blade Runner. I actually have a lot of admiration for it. And there's going to be so much to talk about when it comes to Blade Runner. So that will be next weekend. But of course, and then of course we have Independence Day weekend, which, just to let everybody know, Independence Day is my favorite holiday. And I will be doing several commentaries during that weekend because I got some time off of work. I'll be doing a double feature of Rise of the Planet of the Apes and Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Actually, it's going to start out with a 50th anniversary commentary for Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, followed by Rise. I will also be doing my favorite musical of all time called 1776, which of course came out in 1972 based on the 1969 Tony Award-winning musical starring William Daniels, who a lot of this generation will know as Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World. But with all due respect to Paul, sorry, I got to look up his name now, who played John Adams in the miniseries. But yeah, William Daniels is my John Adams. I mean, that's the John Adams that I grew up with. So we'll be doing 1776. And then on the 4th of July, yes, on the 4th of July, I will be doing a commentary for the Oliver Stone film Born on the 4th of July, starring Tom Cruise, which of course will be celebrating the 76th birthday of Vietnam veteran Ron Kovic. Very much looking forward to that. And I hope you all are too as well. And then in July, we'll be doing more commentaries from the Ladd Company, such as Michael Crichton's Looker, Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat. And then eventually I'll be doing movies like The Right Stuff. And, okay, that seriously looked like Michael Caine in that shot. I don't think it was him, but that really did look like Michael Caine there. So yeah, for the rest of the summer, I'll be doing Ladd Company commentaries such as The Right Stuff and Police Academy, and then eventually Braveheart, the Brady Bunch movies from the 1990s, and then culminating in Ben Affleck's Gone Baby Gone. So that's what's coming up this summer on this channel. Is you'll be seeing pretty much commentaries all for the Ladd Company releases from the early 1980s, the mid 1990s, and the mid 2000s. And of course, the reason why I'm doing all those is because Alan Ladd Jr., who was the producer that gave the green light to George Lucas in Star Wars, he founded the Ladd Company in 1980. And I did the first one, commentary, which was for Chariots of Fire. I did that last weekend, and we'll be doing more of his later in the summer. So that's what we have looking forward to. Oh, thank you very much, Rob. I really do appreciate it. Really do appreciate it. So yeah, this is the great final sequence of Frenzy, where John Finch escapes from the hospital. The police inspector gets wind of it. And so all three of the main characters Richard Blaney, Chief Inspector Timothy Oxford, and Robert Rusk, will all be meeting at the same place, and we will close Frenzy, which is, of course, not Hitchcock's last movie, but definitely his last great movie, his last truly great contribution to the world of cinema. And here again, not discussed enough, not talked about enough, not watched enough, I think. And this movie made money. I mean, it had a $2 million budget, and it made about $12.5 million. So it made money in 1972, and it was actually a decent hit for Universal, who, after, of course, Topaz and Torn Curtain were box office disappointments and critical disappointments on top of that. Like I said, this was definitely the comeback of the master. Great point of view shots right here as John Finch makes his way up the stairs. The close up of the hand on the stairs here. Once again, this is the same staircase at Risk's apartment that we went down earlier with the camera, and now we are going up as John Finch makes his way to Robert Rusk's apartment. Would I put Frenzy in my top 5 Hitchcock films? Maybe. That's a really tough call. It would definitely be in the top 10. It's definitely in the top 10 of Hitchcock for me. Top 5? I'm not... I don't know. It might appear on like 6 or 7 on my list. I mean, North by Northwest would be number 1, obviously. And then after that, I would have Vertigo, and then Psycho, and then Rear Window. even though I think all four of those films are absolute masterpieces. And then number 5 would be the 39 Steps for me. So I think Frenzy would appear as number 6, 7, or 8 on that list, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely up there. And of course, one final bit of nudity from Mr. Hitchcock. Oh, of course, another victim, and then Alec Mccowen comes in. Oh. This is a great ending. Just a great, great ending. Here again, maybe not up to the ending of North by Northwest, because the thing about that ending is that, of course, we have Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint about to have sex on a train, and then the ending, and then the final shot is, of course, the train going through a tunnel. It's a penetration joke. I don't think a lot of audiences in 1959 picked up on that. I don't think none of them picked up on that at the time. But yeah, this is a great, marvelous ending where, Mr. Rusk, you're not wearing your tie. And originally, I mean, Rusk was supposed to bow his head and accept defeat and everything, but Hitchcock was like, no. Serial killer wouldn't do that. Just drop the trunk, and there is the end of the movie. Yeah. And here we have our great cast. You know, John Finch, Barry Foster, Barbara Lee Hunt, Anna Massey, Alec Mccowen, Vivian Merchant, Billie Whitelaw. And yeah, just wonderful, wonderful cast here. Made at Pinewood Studios, London, England, and on location in London. Yep, definitely. And finally, to cap it all off, a Universal release. And Universal was very, very happy with this film, with its reception and everything. Yeah, just a great Hitchcock film. A great Hitchcock film that doesn't get enough love and discussion, I think, these days. But anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight. I will look forward to seeing you all again next weekend when I do Blade Runner. So until then, you all have a great